Okay, well, turn in your Bibles to the book of Judges. We're very close to the end of the text here in Judges 20. And today we're gonna talk about a civil war that we saw the seeds sown the last time we were together. And just when you think of the concept of a civil war, there's few things more disastrous to a nation, few things more indicative of society gone wrong than when the citizens of its people, especially when they're literal brothers, relatives as they are in the nation of Israel, be willing to take up arms and to kill one another over some principle. What does it take for you? We're not trying to be silly here. I know I didn't grow up with siblings. I know some of you who did, I wanted to kill my brother or my sister. But really, what does it take for society or for a nation to be so polarized that they'd be willing to take up arms against and kill your neighbor? It's a shocking statement of how depraved a culture gets. In any time, any civil war breaks out anywhere, there's fewer things that could be more indicative of a breakdown of the society. And it's no different here when we see it happen in Israel. And really what we're seeing is the fruition, the outcome of this refrain: everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This is what happens. If everyone does what's right in their own eyes, then two neighbors will look at a property line and say, nope, I don't think it should be there, it should be here. And if everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes, well, maybe if I have a bigger gun or more people in my family, we'll figure this out through the shedding of blood. But in this case, there's something more deep. There's a rot that's very, very disgusting. We do have to remember the events of Judges 19, which has been a few weeks, but Judges 19, as we said last time, was probably one of the most descriptively wicked, awful, disgusting passages of the Bible. Just a quick reminder, we had a wandering Levite abandoning his post and his calling as a priest, who is in the hillside country there of Ephraim, and taking for himself a concubine. You could basically think of her as a prostitute, as his wife. Now, you might be surprised, she cheats on him and flees to her father, and eventually the Levite tries to reconcile with her, which he goes to her father's house where she's at and tries to make amends, and her father tries to keep him there, maybe to keep his daughter out of further trouble. We didn't get any clear answer as to why. He might be the only decent human being in the whole of the chapter, but he finally leaves with his concubine and arrives late into the town of Gibeah, which is in the land of the Benjaminites, the tribe of Benjamin. And there an old man sees them sitting out in the middle of the square in the middle of the night by themselves and shows hospitality by taking them in. But unfortunately, the wicked men of Gibeah had made notice of the Levite and his concubine and their servant, and they show up at the door of the old man to demand that they let the Levite out, that they might abuse and assault him. Now the old man, rather than defending the life of his guests, and again, remember in the ancient Near East, that hospitality culture was such that if you took someone in to your house and you found out that even he was your enemy, you would still be obligated to defend him with your very life. So here, it's not even an enemy, but one of his own kinsmen. They're all Israelites here. This old man, instead of defending the life of his guests, he offers his own daughters for them to abuse. But when these men refuse that, the Levite cruelly, this is evil, throws his concubine, his wife, to them, and they abuse her. And the next morning, she dies at the threshold of the door. Now, the Levite is outraged, but perhaps not for the right reasons. Remember, everyone at this time is doing what's right in his or her own eyes. No one is doing what's right in the eyes of God. So what he does next is chops her up into little pieces and sends her body parts to the 11 other tribes of Israel to show his disgust at how wickedly, how evil the men of Gibeah had treated him and his wife. But there's a certain hypocrisy here, because after all, he's the one that threw his wife to them. He could have gone down swinging as well. He could have tried to defend the life of this old man and his wife. So there's no heroes here. The Levite shouldn't have even been wandering around to take a concubine for himself. He should have been a priest serving his people and serving the Lord. He shouldn't have taken a concubine, which is wrong itself, but the concubine shouldn't have been a concubine. She shouldn't have cheated, of course, on her Levite husband either. The old man here seemed nice enough, but then offering his own daughters rather than defending the lives of his guests and his daughters with his own life. It's wicked, it's cowardly, it's immoral, and the obvious wickedness of the men of Gibeah, it's inexcusable. And neither is any of the other sins in the story. Sin begets sin begets sin. None of it is justified. None of it has an excuse. This is something I say in our house. It's something I say to people who come to me for counseling. It's something everyone needs to really embrace. No amount of sin against you justifies you sinning, right? No amount of people sinning against you gives you a pass, an allowance to sin, whether that's against the person that's sinning against you, whether that's you taking it out on someone else because someone sinned against me, I'm not going to sin against someone else, or because someone sinned against me, I'm going to sin against me. It is almost a logical thing that we have this inclination that, look, if someone does something bad to me, if someone sins against me, then obviously, I'm going to respond poorly. I'm going to sin too, as if that's a given. But we are never warranted. No amount of evil done to you or me justifies a sinful response, ever. Because Jesus was sinned against in horrific ways, in terrible ways, but he responded without sin. He's an example of someone who's sinned against, and yet not once, think of that, not once did he respond sinfully because of that. You know what? This happened to me, well, I'm justified in being angry. I'm justified in taking this out on someone else. And unfortunately, I do sometimes hear Christians basically say, well, of course, Jesus could do that. Of course, Jesus is not going to respond to sin with sin. Well, yeah, he is Jesus. He's amazing. And somehow, you are supposed to follow in his footsteps in this regard. And I'm just saying this because you can see all the sin that's happening here. And if you put yourself in the shoes of anyone in this story and imagine the sin and the abuse that's happening, if it were happening to you, you would, of course, imagine yourself getting angry, upset, and sinning in return probably and say, well, that's just me, that's human nature. But Jesus does expect us to deal with sin the same way he did. 1 Peter chapter 2. And it's not a main point, it's just, I think, an important one. 1 Peter 2:21, listen to this. For to this you have been called. This is part of who you are as a Christian, as a disciple. For to this you've been called because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. So what Jesus did, you are intended to do as well as a Christian, as a disciple, as a follower of Jesus. Well, what? Give me an example. He says, he committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. Now, this is specifically talking about, continue verse 23. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. In other words, the specific context of Peter saying, follow this example of suffering, follow this example of not returning sin with sin, it's exactly Jesus on the night he was betrayed, going through the trials, being beaten, having his hair plucked out of his face, being stripped down, whipped on his back, being forced to carry a cross that he did not deserve, all of that. He endured that to leave you an example of when people sin against you, you don't get to sin in return. That's a crazy thought. I mean, it really is if you think about it. But you can do it because Jesus did it. He himself bore our sins in his body on the tree that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By his wounds, you have been healed. In other words, you're dead to sin. When someone does something sinful to you, if you're really dead to sin, there's no sinful response to come out. It should be a righteous response that comes out. And I know we're all struggling with that. But the goal, the ideal is that when you suffer at the hands of sinners, you're not prompted to sin in return or response. And I say that because Judges 20, it's a little bit of a mixed bag of whether people are handling being sinned against rightly. And there's a little bit of a debate even of whether Israel is going to be doing the right thing here in Judges 20. But keeping in mind 1 Peter 2, maybe that will help us analyze what happens in Judges 20. Now we're going to kind of do this a little fast because most of the story is about how Israel fights against Benjamin. But we want to examine a little bit more deeply here what's going on. So coming into chapter 20, we come in with a premise that a lot of sin going on. Now Israel has a chance. They've received body parts, the tribes of Israel. What are they going to do in response to this grievous sin at a time when everyone is doing what's right in their own eyes? Verse 1, then all the people of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, and that's just a phrase saying from the northernmost part to the southernmost part. So it's everybody. It's another way of saying everybody, including the land of Gilead, and the congregation assembled as one man to Yahweh at Mizpah. Mizpah was about 8 miles north of Jerusalem, 3 miles from Gibeah. If you look at the back of your handout, there's a map there. Kind of visualize that. And the chiefs of all the people, of all the tribes of Israel, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 men on foot that drew the sword. Now the people of Benjamin heard that the people of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. And the people of Israel said, tell us, how did this evil happen? And the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, I came to Gibeah that belongs to Benjamin, I and my concubine, to spend the night. And the leaders of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house against me by night. They meant to kill me, and they violated my concubine, and she's dead. So I took hold of my concubine and cut her in pieces and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they have committed abomination and outrage in Israel. Behold, you people of Israel, all of you, give your advice and counsel here. Now, the totality of Israel is here, except for Benjamin, of course, because they're the accused party, or at least they're going to defend Gibeah, their city. They're going to defend. So the 11 tribes of Israel are there. A notable absent is the people of Yabesh Gilead, who lived on the other side of the Jordan River. So the Jordan River kind of runs on the eastern side of the Promised Land. On the other side of it, a tribe of Israel lived there, and of course they're always told, listen, you guys are on the other side of the Jordan, you're going to be tempted not to do stuff when we're all doing stuff together because you're on the other side. It's a case where, yeah, they didn't show up, and there's going to be consequences for that later, but just know. So almost everybody's there, and 400,000 soldiers show up. Just for a visual, Anaheim Stadium holds about 45,000 people. So if you imagine about 10 of those is this crowd of men. Dodger Stadium is like 56,000 if you're a Dodgers fan instead. So you imagine, 8 or 9 Dodger stadiums full of men who could carry the sword. Soldiers. That's intimidating. They're just 3 miles from Gibeah. 3 miles is not that far. Certainly the people in Gibeah saw this huge crowd of people, and the Benjaminites, of course, would have noticed as well that so many of their kin were in the land, and they did not look friendly. But let's note some positives here first. On the plus side, there were at least some limits to their depravity. Even at a time when everyone's doing evil on the side of Yahweh and everyone's doing right in their own eyes, they were able to say, it's sort of messed up what they did to this concubine. It's funny because, not funny, but even more relativists will say that some things really should not be done and are evil. If you ever get into a conversation with someone that thinks that morality is relative, that what's good and bad, it changes with the times, and you ask them, well, is it ever, is it ever okay just to take a baby and kill it or murder it? And they'll often give you some hemming and hawing. Yes, it's wrong, right? Like, who's going to ever say something like that is okay? Even more relativists will hit a certain limit. It's only the true psychopath, perhaps, that has no moral compunction whatsoever. But for the most part, there's a line. The people will draw a line somewhere. And what happened to the concubine, it crossed some kind of threshold for them. And you read that and you sort of hope that this was a wake-up call to shake them out of their moral slumber and stupor. And it even says that they came as one man to Yahweh, meaning that there's a hope, that there was unity in coming before God because of this issue. Maybe she died and it was not for nothing, because it's going to stir up the moral hearts of the people. And commentator G. Campbell Morgan writes, a great moral passion flamed out. Underneath all the degeneracy was a true stratum of religious conviction, which in the presence of the iniquity of the men of Gibeah sprang to life and action. And perhaps you could generally principalize that there are times when things need to get really bad and hit rock bottom before a person might realize the kind of depravity that they've gotten themselves into. Maybe you've met people where they didn't know how bad things, their addiction had gotten, or their gambling had gotten, or their, pornography addiction had gotten, until they hit rock bottom. So they got caught or something happened, and they just realized the filth that they were in. They said, I can't believe it. I didn't realize. And you're hoping for that kind of moment here with Israel. Now, a better way to go, though, than having to hit rock bottom before you realize you're in a bad spot, is to check in on your own heart regularly. I mean, let me tell you, I think if you've ever been a person that's hit rock bottom before, it's not a pleasant feeling. And I know some people, that's maybe the only language they'll hear. But Christianity has this thing where in the Lord's Prayer, it says, this is a daily prayer, give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So as often as you need, say, food and drink, you should be doing a heart check. Who do I need to ask forgiveness from? Am I good with others? What do I need to ask forgiveness for? Just a heart check daily. Where am I at with God? Better to do that on a daily basis than to have one of these hard lessons thrust in your face, and in this case via just a body part showing up in the mailbox. So this Levite, of course, retells the story, and he's asking for judgment and justice against Gibeah. But you notice he's not quite telling the story right. He's leaving out the fact that he was saving his own skin by throwing the concubine like a raw meat to a pack of wolves, and the fact that he's just as much culpable for her death as were the men of Gibeah. We read last time, how does Paul talk about a husband's love for his wife? Right? You're supposed to love her to the point of your own death, just like Jesus died for the church. Hey, husband, you should be willing to die for your wife. Did we see that on display here? No, not at all. So we know that he is in the wrong here, and of course, in the telling of it, he's going to tell it in a way that's favorable to him. But understand that there should have been a judgment and justice given to him too. But he's telling his side of the story, and if the Israelites were wise at all, they should have inquired more to the story. But nevertheless, you can imagine him giving his appeal giving his demand for justice. You've seen probably enough videos, courtroom videos are popular now, of someone pleading before a judge to make right the injustices, or giving a press conference demanding justice for some unjust act that has occurred. And what does Israel do to respond? All the people, verse 8, arose as one man, saying, none of us will go to his tent, and none of us will return to his house. But now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot, and we will take 10 men of 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, and 100 of 1,000, and 1,000 of 10,000, to bring provisions for the people. And when they come, they may repay Gibeah of Benjamin for all the outrage that they have committed in Israel. So all the men of Israel gathered against the city, united as one man. Now, this whole thing is going to be kind of an extreme measure, because what they're essentially saying is 1/10 of us are going to be committed to supplying our troops in a siege of our brother tribe, the Benjaminites. So they've committed to an action of war, is what they're saying, and we are going to punish them by setting up a long-term siege. I mean, there's already 400,000 of them. You're going to see that the Benjaminites, they muster up not even, I think, 5% of that. No, don't make me do the math. But they're going to muster 26,700. I don't know what fraction that is of 400,000. But this is not going to be an easy fight, but they're committing to war, is essentially what's happening here, and really punishing their own brethren. Now, typically, if something as horrific as what happened to this concubine happened in the city of Irvine, police would be called, the suspects would be arrested, there's a trial. And while Israel didn't have exactly the same kind of, legal system as we do, they had elders and local leaders to judge these kinds of matters. So what this is indicating, the fact that the Levite has to do any of this to begin with, is that it was obvious to the Levite there would be no justice in this case in Gibeah. That the men of Gibeah, the leadership of Gibeah, the law of Gibeah was too corrupt. And in fact, he didn't expect there would be any justice in the territory of the tribe of Benjamin either. That's how bad things had gotten. I mean, it's a scary thing. Look, I know everyone probably complains about the justice system at some time. We've had interferences with it. We've been talking about some of the frustrations we have with immigration or DHS, with some of the prayer requests and things like that. You've probably had some run-ins with law enforcement and things like that, and you think, they're crooked or corrupt, but in America, really, frankly, it's not that bad. I know people want to make it out as if we're some third world country and everyone does whatever they want. It's not true. For the most part, you call 911 and you're going to get someone. If you call a journalist because there's some injustice going on, they're going to come and you're going to start getting lawyers and a GoFundMe. You're going to find justice for the most part. You haven't been to a country where you can't trust anybody, where everyone's got their hand out for a bribe, where even the police officers, when they pull you over, are expecting you to give them money. Most of us have not lived in a country like that before, but that's a reality in a lot of places, and that's not good for society. It's not a good feeling when you think you're not going to get justice. Be thankful for living in America, but here, for him to basically say, the only way this is going to get any traction is if I cut up my wife into tiny pieces and mail her to the other part. That's the only way we're going to get enough attention to get justice. That's just saying, it's another way of saying that's how wicked and awful things had gotten amongst God's people, the Israelites. They had the law of Moses. These are the men and women who came up out of Egypt and saw God's wonders. They were supposed to be the chosen people who knew right and wrong, who had the obligation and the privilege to be this shining nation and city on a hill that would demonstrate to the whole world what a just system and society looks like. And you're saying that the only way they're going to get justice is by cutting a woman into tiny pieces to get the attention. That's how awful it is there. I'm just trying to paint the picture of how wicked, how bad things were. Of course, we all agree, guilty people should be punished, but they seem very intent here to punish the whole city, maybe even all of Benjamin. They're out for blood. Is this right? Is this the right judgment call they're making? We're going to punish Gibeah, all of Gibeah, and probably all the Benjamites. Well, commentators get a little split. On the one hand, they're rightfully morally outraged at rape and murder, as everyone should be. Rape and murder carry the death penalty in the Mosaic Law. You can look at Deuteronomy 22, 25, and 26. But on the other hand, they're going to punish the entire city. Is that right to punish the whole city? Now, some point to a passage in Deuteronomy 22 as well that says if you find men in a city that have led the people to idolatry in that city, wipe that city out, kill everybody in it, and the cattle too. And it sounds like that's what they're going to do here. But is that the accusation? Is that they've fallen to idolatry? I mean, they clearly have, but really right now the issue of justice is regarding the rape and murder of this concubine. Well, you kind of split. Maybe they are doing the right thing. Maybe it's the right call. On the other hand, you're gonna see the consequences of this, and it's just awful. It's terrible. It just leaves a bad taste in your mouth. None of it feels very good. Like, this just is awful. Makes everybody look bad. Makes God look bad about how terribly they're gonna conduct this whole thing. And God does seem to be punishing them. So it's one of those situations we've run into many times in Judges where it's hard to say whether the narrator directly does not, if the narrator of this text does not directly say something positive or negative about it, you're sort of left in a position to know yourself God's character and word and his nature, to determine whether this is righteousness or not, and then to look at the outcomes and judge by the outcome what God's take on the situation is. So we can debate about it at least a little bit to see if this is the right thing to do or not. The outcome, though, is civil war and many deaths. And in the case of a civil war, it almost feels like when that sort of situation happens, God is punishing everybody because everybody's wrong. Civil war, it's very hard to see anyone being very good or right about it. Anyway, so continuing on, verse 12. And the tribes of Israel sent men through all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What evil is this that has taken place among you? Now therefore give up the men, the worthless fellows in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and purge evil from Israel." But the Benjaminites would not listen to the voice of their brothers, the people of Israel. Then the people of Benjamin came together out of the cities to Gibeah to go out to battle against the people of Israel. And the people of Benjamin mustered out of their cities on that day 26,000 men who drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who mustered 700 chosen men. Among all those were 700 chosen men who were left-handed. Everyone could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. And the men of Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 men who drew the sword. All these were men of war. The people of Israel arose and went up to Bethel and inquired of God, "Who shall go up first for us to fight against the people of Benjamin?" And Yahweh said, "Judah shall go up first." Then the people of Israel rose in the morning and encamped against Gibeah. And the men of Israel went out to fight against Benjamin, and the men of Israel drew up the battle line against them at Gibeah. The people of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and destroyed on that day 22,000 men of the Israelites. But the people, the men of Israel, took courage and again formed the battle line in the same place where they had formed it on the first day. And the people of Israel went up and wept before Yahweh until the evening, and they inquired of Yahweh, "Shall we go again? Or shall we again draw near to fight against our brothers, the people of Benjamin?" And Yahweh said, "Go up against them." So the people of Israel came near against the people of Benjamin the second day. And Benjamin went against them out of Gibeah the second day and drew 18,000 men of the people of Israel. All these were men who drew the sword, or destroyed 18,000 men. Then all the people of Israel, the whole army, went up and came to Bethel and wept. They sat there before Yahweh and fasted that day until evening. and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before Yahweh. And the people of Israel inquired of Yahweh, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, ministered before it in those days, saying, shall we go out once more to battle against our brothers, the people of Benjamin, or shall we cease? And Yahweh said, go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand. Here, we see that God's intent seems to be to try and correct the behavior of all that are involved in this endeavor. It's not just the Benjaminites who are in the wrong, because we see Judah take casualties in this fight. It's interesting that in 2011, forgot to mention this a second ago, that for the third time, it said that Israel gathered as one man. Now, typically unity is to be praised, but of course, people can be united around wicked causes as well, like the Tower of Babel. They're definitely tried to do something together that was not good. It's not necessarily good that they were all of one mind in this case. You contrast that this morning in Acts chapter 1, where all of the disciples were gathered in the upper room, and they were all of one mind, of one accord. That's a good kind of unity. Is this a good kind of unity? Again, it depends on whether you think that what they're doing here is justified or not. Now, was this a genuine offer? When they offer, they go to Gibeah and say, just give up the worthless fellows there, and we'll put them to death and purge the evil. Was this a genuine offer that there would be no need for violence? Now remember, hundreds of thousands of men are right there a few miles away. They're preparing for a siege and a fight. They're casting lots even for who gets to first crack. The Israelites, they seem ready for blood, but is it justice or is it revenge? And I think that's a question maybe we don't get a clear answer to here, although I lean towards the fact that they were kind of bloodthirsty here. But it's definitely something to ask yourself when you're in a situation where you feel very sinned against, where you feel like some injustice has occurred to you and you want to respond to that. Is it justice or is it revenge? I think it's worthwhile to ask your heart, what am I being motivated by here? To see the right thing happen or to see people that did wrong get punished? There can be a fine line between the two. Now, we won't know the answer because they refused to offer anyway. The Benjaminites don't deny the charges. They don't plead for understanding. They don't say, there must be a mistake here. They're ready to defend the evil actions of their people, to give it cover. Now, this is not uncommon. This is just nations. This is what has happened in every culture and society, is that you give a pass and cover to the sins of the people that you like or that are your own. I mean, you see this happen a lot in political parties, is you'll be very quick to point out the sins of the other candidate, but if your candidate does the same thing, for some reason that's okay, because it's your guy. Right? That kind of hypocrisy has happened forever and ever. You decry some sin, you're hearing the latest gossip, right? And you're judging, some reality TV show family, for all of the, lurid and terrible things they do. And then you find out your cousin, your uncle, someone in your family does the same thing. And now you find yourself justifying it. Well, weren't you just saying that, it's so scandalous or tacky or shameful, when someone else did it, but now you find out that it happened in your family. Oh, now it's okay. I'll give a cover for it. You just have to be careful about that kind of attitude. It's one of the indications, again, of people doing what's right in their own eyes and not what's right in the eyes of God. And so here, the whole Gibeah did something so absolutely bonkers and how evil it is. The people of Benjamin, hey, those are our people. So, we're going to defend it. We're going to defend them. And we're even willing to kill our own kin, our cousins, our family. There's no goodness in giving special passes for sinning. whether that's because of skin color or financial status or popularity or any other reason that we give sin passes to people that we like or are like us, because God does not give special passes for sin. God's an impartial judge. It's like we said at the beginning, no amount of sin against us justifies our sin against other people. No amount of things that people have done, good works they've done, warrants that they can sin against others. God is the judge, and he's going to judge here. We see it. The battle lines are drawn. You have 26,700 men between Benjamin and Gibeah, but they're noted to be excellent warriors. There's something unique about, Benjamin is son of my right hand, but it's interesting to note that there have been very excellent warriors who were left-handed. We met one of them earlier. One of the judges was a left-handed man. He killed Eglon, remember the fat king? He's left-handed, and so that became part of the strategy. So there's this kind of connection between left-handedness, being an excellent warrior. Of course, the idea that you could sling a stone and hit a hair, it's just how accurate they are. If you watch the Olympics, and watch archery events, they have all these mechanisms hanging off of their bow so that they can hit a target that's like 100 meters away, within like this little quarter-sized target or something. But these guys, no fancy, tech on their slings. It's just a rope, their arm, and a stone, and they're hitting a hair, at whatever distance this was. It's just an expression of how excellent their warriors were. So they're pitting their best against the masses of the Israelites. On paper, there's absolutely no question, though, how this should go. 400,000 versus 26,700, there's no contest here. What's interesting is at this point, the people of Israel inquire of God. It's the first time it's happened, right? And the question they ask is not whether we should go through with this, but who gets the first crack at Benjamin? Who gets the glory? Who gets the honor of bringing justice against our kinsmen, the Benjaminites? It's a little bit of a sad statement. It's meant to be a little bit of a sad statement that this is finally when they inquire of God, not at the beginning, not in the beginning of the chapter when this first happens, but here when they've already made the determination. They've already made themselves the judge, jury, and executioner. It's now the only thing they have to ask of God is who gets to be the executioner. Well, that's backward. It's wrong that they do this, and we know this because of the outcome. Judah shall go first. Not that they're going to win, just that Judah's going to go first. And they get routed, 22,000 of them falling. There's supposed to be an irony here because Judges 1 and 2 begins with, if you remember, I didn't remember, so I had to go back to, after the death of Joshua, the people of Israel inquired of Yahweh, who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? And Yahweh said, Judah shall go up. So it's kind of an echo of that. But what's the difference? The Benjaminites are not the Canaanites. The Canaanites are a bunch of pagans. But you're supposed to read like the Benjaminites have become like worse than the Canaanites in their wickedness, in their sin. So they need to be wiped out, quote unquote, just like the Canaanites were. But Judah was not that much better. Judah was not worthy to wipe out the Benjaminites because they're just like the Benjaminites and not in a good way. We know that they're not, let's say, worthy to because they lost this first battle. Remember, the recurring theme of Joshua was that the battle wasn't won by superior firepower or having more men or having a better strategy, but faith in the Lord. That's what determined the outcome of the battle. And that's true at the beginning of Judges as well. Now, Judges 20 is happening at a time when everyone was doing evil in the sight of Yahweh. Everyone's just doing what they want. There's no king in Israel. And we see that Yahweh is affirming, yes, you're first to go, but first to lose. You don't have faith. You're not necessarily doing this for the right reasons. And so the consequence tells us, even though if the narrator doesn't say Judah's evil, the consequence tells us that Judah was also just as wicked and undeserving of God's favor, just as sinful and wrong and guilty as the Benjaminites were. Now, after the first loss of 22,000, they weep, they inquire again of Yahweh, and what does he say? Go up against them. It's the same thing he said, or before Judah shall go up first. Second time, Judah, go ahead and go up against them, and they lose 18,000 more. So they lose 40,000 in these two battles against, remember, they have 400,000 against 26,700. After the second loss, we see a difference. That they weep again, but this time they fast, they offer burnt offerings and peace offerings, and they inquire with the priest, Phinehas. So there's a difference between the seeming repentance, the first time they lost, and the second one. The difference is that they are, in their offering of burnt offerings and peace offerings, they're acknowledging their sin. This is a rebuke in the first two defeats. There's a rebuke that God was not behind this. God was not for what they were doing. And it's not necessarily that he was against justice being brought upon the Benjaminites. Think about this. It's not, what God was not opposed to was that the Benjaminites needed some consequence for their sin. The problem was the hypocrisy of Judah, thinking that they were morally superior to bring this judgment against Benjamin when they themselves are just as sinful. Or another way to put it in a New Testament sense, like Jesus when he said, don't go to your brother who has a speck in his eye to try and remove it when you have a log in your own eye. Now, it might very well be true that there's a speck in your brother's eye. There's some sin in his life. That might be true, that needs to be rebuked, just like the Benjaminites did. But there's a certain folly, there's certain immorality even in God's eyes for you to try to point out that sin while you have the same sin, maybe even worse, lodged in your own heart. That's the problem here. It's not that Benjamin didn't need the rebuke. It's that Judah did not think they had any problems or any sins in their own heart. We're often so quick to demand justice and judgment against others, but you know that if you were the one on trial, you would ask for every benefit of the doubt, every patience, every grace. Be careful trying to point out the sins of others without looking at the log in your own eye first. Now, Phinehas is mentioned here to be the priest at the time. This is helpful because it gives us a little bit of a time frame. Remember, the end of Judges here, past couple chapters, is stories that happen during the rest of the story of Judges. In other words, they're kind of side stories that fit in chronologically earlier in the book of Judges. So this is not happening at the very end of the time of Judges. This is actually happening more towards the beginning, and we know that because it's talking about Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, who is Moses' brother. So Joshua takes over from Moses. Joshua dies, and then you have the time of the Judges. There's a span of like 100 years or so there, right? Or less. So when you're not very many generations into the time of Judges. In other words, this outrageous scenario here is happening relatively early in the life of the Israelites when they first got into the Promised Land. It's not like after hundreds of years of decadence and moral decay and corruption, and they finally got to this point. It's like, no, almost as soon as Joshua dies. and there's no king, there's no leader, they just go buck wild. And it gets into this kind of degeneracy that quickly. So this is telling us that this happened relatively early. Things went bad pretty fast in Israel after Joshua died. It's just a sad reality. But again, to look on the positive, Judah and the people of Israel, they come to some kind of recognition of their sin. They really repent, because God's response is different the third time, which is, go up tomorrow, I will give them into your hand. In other words, you will have victory this time. You've demonstrated some kind of true repentance this third time. And they go out, and I'm not going to read the whole account, but basically Judges 29 through 46. It can be a little bit hard to follow. One commentator helps by pointing out that first, there's a general account of the battle, 29 through 36, followed by a more detailed and supplementary account, 36 to 46. And essentially, it's, if you like military strategy, you can read it, but the Benjaminites are routed by the Israelites. They lose the battle, lose almost all of their men, almost wipes out the tribe of Benjamin as a consequence. So they do lose. Leviticus 19, 17, and 18. What do we make of all this? I mean, it's civil war, it's ugly, it's brutal. They nearly wipe out their own brothers because of this. They kind of deserve it, but is this too extreme? It's not pretty, any of it, right? It's ugly. Civil war is ugly. Brother against brother is ugly. How do we, what kind of applications can we draw here? Leviticus 19, 17 and 18. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am Yahweh. Of course, that you shall love your neighbor as yourself gets quoted multiple times in the New Testament. Here is a caution. In the book of Leviticus, the book of Leviticus is called that because it's for the Levites. Here's this Levite who was brought upon his brothers this tremendous judgment and slaughter. He sort of deserved it himself too. In fact, all of the Israelites did. How much better might it have gone if the Israelites had kept the statutes of God here? That instead of letting it get to a point where you have this systemic failure of a society where men just come to your house and say, get out here so we can abuse you, and people are throwing out daughters and concubines, that if they had just before that, many days, many years before that, kept to this principle, don't hate your brother in your heart, reason with them. We live at a time, I'm not saying we're on the verge of civil war or anything like that. I hate, all those talking heads and all the politics. I hate talking about all of this, but let me just say that we are not served as a country or as churches or as neighbors to harbor hate in your heart for your neighbor. You might think it's harmless to sit there and just stay away from your neighbor, to not reason with them, to not love them, to just let them do what they do, and think, well, I'm just going to align myself. I'm just going to be with people that agree with me and just only hang out and talk with people that agree with me and just get in our little holy huddles. But basically resent your neighbor and your brother. If you multiply that out by everyone, you will get to, everyone's going to be right in their own eyes, and you'll get to civil war. That's how it happens, is when individuals make a choice to hate their neighbor and hate their brother, to not be willing to reason frankly with your neighbor, to bear grudges and grievances and never resolve them. It just starts with individuals doing that, but you multiply that by 300 million. And you are going to have a society where there's no justice, where there is a threat of civil war and all these things, because everyone's doing right in their own eyes. I think there is an application there. We're not Israel. We're going to see the fallout of this civil war next time. But I think we can apply that to ourselves today. You should not hate your neighbor. If you disagree with them on something, and you do, you should be trying to reason frankly with them. And even if they don't agree with you, don't think it's we got to have vengeance for this injustice, but to love them as you love yourself, and see how much further that might take any further discussions. Certainly it would lower the temperature when it comes to all the politics and things that are happening now. Just consider the fate of Israel at that time. That's not something you want. How do we avoid it? Don't hate your brother in your heart. Don't hate your neighbor. Love them as you love yourself. Of course, Jesus exemplified this. He loved even his enemies. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. You can love your enemy even. You are empowered to do that through the gospel. Jesus, that's what he did in a nutshell. He died for his enemies. We were his enemies because of sin. But you can be his friend, his brother, his disciple, if you put your faith in him, if you're not a Christian. If you are a Christian, just consider the great role we have as a church to be a place where we love our neighbor, not hate them, and see how we can transform a culture and a society to be more just because of our love for them.